Welcome to History and Politics with Dr. Brovkin channel. Today, my dear friends and subscribers and guests to my channel, I would like to speak about Trump, Putin, and G7. Why? Because there are some very interesting developments going on at the G7, which I think were sort of misrepresented in Western mainstream media. Very important details and context was missing in interpreting what actually happened and why that is so significant. So the Western coverage, Western mainstream media coverage of G7 was essentially repeating the same story of Western unity. And there are all kinds of episodes of Trump did this and patted on the back this, and he said, I'm the boss. And there are all kinds of politically not very significant gestures and episodes. And of course, presence of Zelensky was played up, and there were all kinds of photo ops and handshakes and support expressions of support, and everything looked like it was supposed to be to show unanimity of Western powers in their support for Ukraine and military support for Ukraine in order to force Russia to the negotiating table. That's the formula that had been used consecutively or all the time in recent months by what I call the three belligerent leaders of European Union: Macron, Chancellor Merz, and Prime Minister Starmer. They repeated that a few days ago at the meeting with Zelensky in front of the Downing Street 10, and they, as I already discussed it, had this plan of 5 points, which essentially demanded of Russia to capitulate and pay to Ukraine and abandon the Donbas territories that had voted to be with Russia back in 2014. So that's the official Western media. What's wrong with this? There are two very important things that are wrong, and that is the position of President Trump and the position of Prime Minister of Italy, Meloni. And I shall start with Trump. On the 14th of June, just a couple of days before the G7 meeting, it was President Putin who called Trump. Officially, it was just to congratulate him on the 80th birthday. And the congratulatory words were indeed very, very warm. Excessively so, to my understanding. He called him a very talented leader and that he had gone through a lot of hardships and unjust treatment. And essentially, Trump heard all the things he likes to hear. But it was much more than that. The conversation lasted 55 minutes. And it's obvious that one needs 55 minutes that one does not need 55 minutes to say happy birthday. And according to Yuri Ushakov, who is the aide to President Putin, the conversation was friendly and frank. Now, usually when we interpret what that means, friendly and frank, is that they discussed a wide range of topics. And indeed, Ushakov did quote that Trump said that what one needed was to seek a diplomatic solution to the conflict, and that if that solution was found, there would be, quote, new quality to the US-Russian relations. So, in other words, they did discuss Russian-American relations and ways of improving it, and that means ways of concluding finally, after a year since Anchorage, a year of false hopes and unrealized expectations, finally moving to the conclusion of the negotiations. Now, so that is official. The topics included Ukraine and bilateral ties and improving relations. Now, during the G7, Trump actually did not act as if he had made some kind of a definitive agreement with Putin. He played along to Macron and to Starmer and to Merz in terms of support for Ukraine, and he actually acted as if he is part of the group of those countries that want to exercise pressure on Russia. He even spoke about sanctions or on Russian oil and all this. My understanding is that this is just empty words. Trump likes to say things to people who want to hear what they want to hear, and then he forgets about those and then moves on. For some reason, I trust him more in the validity of what he meant when he spoke to Putin and they discussed improving our relations. Why? Simply because it is in Trump's interest now to move and on the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia in order to show success that he needs desperately. And that is partly confirmed by how he phrased the Ukraine war, Russia-Ukraine war, at the G7 meeting. That is official. That is on record. He said, and I quote, "The war has no impact on us other than that we sell weapons." These are Trump's words. And he said, "Ukraine was thousands of miles away." These are his words. And then he also said that the United States had nothing to do with the war. Now, this is very interesting and very important. Of course, the United States has everything to do with this war, and it continues to provide intelligence through Musk's satellites, and it's American weapons who are being paid for by the Europeans. Nevertheless, the way he presented himself officially at G7 as a go-between, as a neutral party seeking to end the conflict. And that hasn't happened for many, many months, probably since the fall of 2025. Now, what's also important, and the Western media ignored completely, is the special position that was taken by Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. And that is that whereas Macron, Merz, and Starmer kept about pressure on Russia, new sanctions on Russia, new military aid to Ukraine so that Ukraine could come to the negotiations as a strong military power. Whereas these people supported and repeated Ukraine propaganda claims that the war, for some strange reason, now has turned in Ukraine's favor. All of this is, of course, not true, but the diplomatic initiative is very important to notice, a separate position of Meloni. Now, at the meeting, Meloni also expressed solidarity with Ukraine, but the key difference is that she spoke about diplomatic solutions. These are her words, diplomatic solutions. Now, this word in itself wouldn't have meant much unless we take into account the background. And the background is on June 11th and 12th, 2026, just a few days before the summit in France, the Italian Chamber of Deputies in the parliament, with the direct support and initiative of Giorgia Meloni's party, the League, passed a resolution which included language calling for the gradual lifting of sanctions on Russia once the Ukraine conflict was resolved. Now, let's see the difference. Macron and Merz and Starmer spoke about placing Western troops in Russia once the conflict was resolved, whereas Meloni spoke about gradual lifting of sanctions on Russia. This is the difference. Moreover, this is the first time since the conflict began that a major Western power, as far as I know, no other member of the European Union ever voiced this, except perhaps Hungary, the proposal to gradually lift sanctions on Russia. This could only, in today's political circumstance, one could expect to hear it from the opposition parties, such as from Alternative from Germany, and perhaps also from the Marine Le Pen's party. But I don't think she actually proposed anything like that, except general diplomatic solution to the conflict. So what that means is that at the G7, behind the facade of unity, you have in fact two camps. One is Trump, supported by Meloni, who emphasize finding a diplomatic solution to the conflict and resuming negotiations. And the second position, trying to bring Trump on board of the bellicose position, forcing Russia, increasing pressure, supplying weapons to Ukraine. That's the position that has not yielded any results. And yet is still on and on and on since 2022. And finally, I'd like to say a few words about the military situation. Again, here the Western narrative has been emphasizing supposed Ukraine gains. I ask them, where are the gains? Show me the towns or the villages which they supposedly have regained. And I'm telling you, my dear friends and subscribers, there are none. There were no villages, no at all, that Ukraine has regained. On the contrary, it is that the Konstantinovka, a major fortress, is about to fall, is completely surrounded, and half of it is taken over today by Russian troops. And Liman, another important city in the Kharkov province, that is also completely surrounded and is about to fall. So this is about the front line. But Ukrainian narrative is pushed aggressively by Western media, emphasizing that the Ukraine is so strong that it can hit Moscow. And they're showing, another oil facility that is burning. As I mentioned many times before, all you need is a match to set fire to an oil storage facility. But here are the specific facts. On the 17th of June, means the 16th, the Ukrainians hit Moscow in a very large hit. There were 180 drones that flew at one point, at one time, against Moscow. Now, of those, according to the Russian sources, almost all were intercepted. And there were several that hit a target, and there were 3 targets that now officially are confirmed as being hit. One of them is the oil facility. The second one was a shopping mall that had damages. And the third one was a drone that hit the apartment building and killed a woman in her own apartment. That's it. There were no more casualties or structural damage from this biggest ever assault on Moscow. But what also happened that the Western media is not so eager to cover is that the Ukrainians hit a bus, another bus, with children in the Bryansk province. And the teacher was killed and several children were seriously wounded. So all of this talk about Ukrainian offensive and Ukrainian surrounding Crimea and cutting it off, it's just wishful thinking. And this is simply Western propaganda mimicking and repeating what you could see in the Kiev Post. And I place here a picture of Kiev Post to see their exorbitant claims of their victories against the Muscovites. That's how they refer to the Russians. So let me now move to conclusion. In terms of the military, the Russians are gaining significant advantage, both in territory and in terms of the targets that they hit daily. One of the most serious ones in the last few days was an attack on the satellite reception centers. These are crucial for the war effort. And the Russians decided, instead of blowing up Musk's satellites, they decided to destroy the reception centers so that the satellites are useless if the data cannot be processed in real time for targeting. This is not reported by Western media except Times of India, where I got this information, and the Russian media. The military offensive is on. Russia is delivering crushing blows to Ukrainian military infrastructure, essentially destroying all military factories one by one, and that will have an effect on the front line. And on the diplomatic front, as I have already said, for the first time in many months, I think there is a real chance for a peaceful settlement because both Putin and Trump need to show success. Both of them face parliamentary elections, the Duma in Moscow in September and the Congress in November. And it seems to be that these circumstances, more than others, push the two towards finding a compromise, and we shall follow how it develops in the coming weeks. Thank you very much, my dear friends, and I want to again emphasize that I have a Twitter to follow my posts, and that my playlists have been converted to podcasts that you could listen to if you prefer, and that I invite you to check several other of my playlists: the war in Ukraine, issues of contemporary politics, Soviet history, Russia under the Bolshevik regime, Russia under Yeltsin and Putin, and European history. Of course, I invite you to read my latest book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, which is coming out this year in Portuguese. Thank you and goodbye.